everyone. This is Deanna Minnick, and welcome to the Detox Summit. Today, we have as our guest Dr. Terry Wahls. Dr. Terry Wahls is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she teaches internal medicine residents. She also sees patients in a traumatic brain injury clinic and conducts clinical trials. So I really like her diverse background of teacher, clinician, and researcher. So she really has a wide breadth of experience to bring to our discussion today. Now, not only is she a trained physician and researcher, but she's also been a patient herself and has had secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt-recline wheelchair for 4 years. And if you haven't been to Dr. Wahls' website, she shows the pictures of her progression, and we're going to hear more about her story. So she has completely recovered. She's restored her health, and she now bikes to work every day as best she can, I'm assuming in Iowa, where she lives. She's the author of The Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine. And she teaches the public and the medical community about the healing power of intensive nutrition. So welcome, Dr. Wahls, to the Detox Summit.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. You were definitely high on my list of people that I wanted to speak because not only are you a book-trained physician and researcher, but you've actually healed yourself through nutrition. So I'm wondering if you can tell the listeners a little bit about you and your own personal journey through this experience.
Sure. So I'm an internal medicine doc, very much a conventional medicine doc. Thought the supplements, alternative medicine was a colossal waste of money. And I was an academic doc, and so I thought the way to cure people was drugs, surgeries, procedures. But then in 2000, I started having some weakness in my left leg and was evaluated by several physicians, had MRIs of my spinal cord, of my brain, lots of blood tests, some nerve conduction velocities. And they saw lesions in my spinal cord. I had abnormal spinal fluid, oligobands. And then when they looked back at my medical records, they saw that I'd had a problem with dimming vision 13 years earlier. So on the basis of having lesions separated by time, 13 years, and space, problems with my vision and problems with my leg, the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis was made. I was told to go on a disease-modifying drug. I decided to go see a second opinion at an internationally recognized MS center, the Cleveland Clinic. They looked everything over, agreed that I had relapsing remitting MS, and I began one of the disease-modifying drugs, Copaxone. So for the next 3 years, I had just one episode of arm weakness. That's called a relapse. I responded well to steroids. And so that would be considered a success if it was a drug trial. But the problem was I'd been getting steadily weaker, less endurance, weaker back muscles. My doc told me it was time to get a scooter and then said, no, I want to get a tilt-recline wheelchair because of the fatigue. So that was in 2003. I, at that time, took Novantrone, and then when it became available, I took Tysabri. And then when that was pulled from the market, I switched over to Cellcept, which is a transplant drug that suppresses your immune cells. Now, when I was first diagnosed with MS, I started reading the medical literature and was very upset because within 10 years, half of people are disabled by fatigue and no longer working, and a third have some level of walking disability. My family convinced me that I should stop reading the literature because it was so upsetting. And so that's why I sought out the best people in the country to go take care of me. And in 2002, my neurologist suggested that I check out the work of Dr. Ashton Embry, Direct MS Charity of Canada. And he was a big fan of Lauren Cordain and eating a Paleolithic diet. And so at that time, after having been a vegetarian for about 20 years, I switched over and gradually reintroduced meat into my diet, went dairy, legume free, and grain free, I should add. but I continued to decline. So in 2003, I needed the wheelchair. And that's when I decided, okay, I'll go back to reading the literature because I knew how bad it was going to be. I couldn't be any more upset. And I began reading basic science papers because I knew it was in the basic science, the mouse and rat studies, that would have the treatments that we'd be using in 30 to 50 years. And then it occurred to me that I was wasting my time reading drug studies. I should try and read studies about vitamins, nutrients, supplements. And as I was doing my reading, I saw that, and I was reading about multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's. I saw that in all these brain conditions with shrinking brains, and with MS, you have a shrinking brain, that the mitochondria were becoming defective and signaling time to die too early in the brain cell and in the spinal cord. And now with more searching, I found articles where those mouse brains had been protected along with their mitochondria using a variety of vitamins and supplements. So I would translate these mouse-sized doses into human-sized doses and begin taking them. And after a few months, I got disgusted, stopped them, and discovered that I couldn't get out of bed anymore. So I resumed my supplements and decided that they were doing something very powerful for me. And they seemed to be slowing down my decline, though I certainly was not recovering. I was still eating a Paleolithic diet. By 2007, I could walk short distances using 2 walking sticks. I could sit up in a regular chair for about 10 minutes. Otherwise, I was too exhausted. And I was in a zero gravity recliner, fully reclined, or in bed. That's how weak I was. That's when I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine, took their course, Neuroprotection, a functional medicine approach for common and uncommon neurologic syndromes. And that, after taking that, I had a much deeper understanding of what I could do to help my brain and a much longer list of vitamins and supplements, which I started taking. Then later that fall, it occurred to me that if I redesigned my diet to make sure I was getting all these things I was taking in pill forms in the food, I'd probably get the naturally occurring form of those items, and they'd be more biologically active. They'd have more of the related compounds. And so, and in addition, I'd probably get thousands, maybe millions of other molecules in that food that would likely be very helpful for my brain. So I went to my registered dietitian friends. They didn't know where these things were in the food supply. I went to the health sciences library and couldn't find answers there. But so then I went back to the internet, started searching, and was able to find those food sources. And so I reorganized my diet, still using paleo principles, but I was maximizing the foods that had the nutrients for these 19 key nutrients. And within a month, my energy was markedly better. My brain fog was markedly less. In 3 months, I'm walking in the hospital without a cane, although I still had a limp, so it was obvious that I had MS. But I'm walking easily. In about 6 months, I'm on my bike for the first time in about 5 years, and in a year, I'm able to do a bike ride, 18-mile bike ride with my family. Then I start lecturing the public about food, and we do a grand rounds at the medical college. And after that, the dean of the medical school helps me get a study team together to design a clinical trial. And I write the grant, get funding to conduct this clinical trial. So in October of 2010, we then start doing a clinical trial testing my full protocol in others with progressive MS. I've since written this book, and I've made it my mission to go out and teach the public and do medical conferences, seminars, et cetera, around the country and now internationally, teaching people about the critical role of nutrition, toxins, lifestyle in health and disease.
Dr. Walls, this is just, I get goosebumps listening to you tell the story. And of course, I've seen you at these functional medicine conferences, and you and I have talked before, and then seeing the pictures on your website. But hearing you tell the details again, I can imagine that the listeners their jaws are dropping. That this
Yes.
is really an amazing story. And the beauty of this is that you are a physician and
Mhm.
that you are in the healthcare medical community where you can make an impact. You can take this to another
Yes.
level. So I'm just curious. I just feel like asking you this question, but how do your colleagues? I mean, obviously, it seems like you've got some receptivity, obviously, because there's the support on the part of studying what you've been doing. But do you ever get resistance? I mean,
Sure.
physicians just aren't trained in nutrition. So, how does that work? Are some people just completely polarized to what you're doing and then other people really like it? Or,
So this has been an evolution. So in 2007, I'm wheelchair bound. 2008, I start walking around. People are amazed when they see me, and then I do this grand rounds. In I think the beginning of 2009, the reception, and this is a very unusual grand rounds. Physicians don't do things like this. You go up and you present a case, which is yourself, and then you discuss the theoretic mechanisms by why you recovered. I assure you, I can't imagine any other grand rounds has ever done that. And so the audience, there were two kinds of responses. One was this was the most brilliant, engaging grand rounds ever was, and the other was this person's a crackpot. What is she doing being, a professor of medicine?
hmm.
And people, I think, correctly said, okay, one case, so what? We know MS is a unpredictable disease, so what? We don't really know why you got better. But the person who was the dean of the College of Medicine had been the chair of medicine when I was hired. He watched my decline, saw my early recovery, and he called me and said, Terry, this is really very important. He had given me advice to get the first report written up as a case report, which I did, and then helped me get the research program going. And every year there are two meetings at the University of Iowa, the College of Medicine Research Day and the Internal Medicine Research Day. So at those meetings, we have our research poster and tell people the status of our research, the preliminary data. And so we're able to show that, yep, people could do this, that it was safe. And then we have the preliminary outcomes results. As people came by and saw that I could get people to actually eat vegetables in a huge way, which my nutrition experts were like, oh my God, this is amazing. No one ever gets this kind of dietary change ever. So they're impressed that we could create that change. And then the change that we're reporting and showing in terms of change on fatigue, energy, brain fog, and walking speed, people would come by, would be very impressed, asked to join my study team because they knew that I was freezing blood. And then I started getting invited to give research seminars to various departments across the university and then across the country. And now, most recently, last fall, I was in China talking about my research.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're getting the word out. So, being that this is a detox summit, I do want us to connect into toxicity
Yeah.
because toxins really do play into autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and other debilitating conditions. And I'm wondering, throughout the course of your own personal journey,
Mhm.
were you ever tested for any kind of toxins or had you come into contact with any kind of toxin exposure? What
Oh,
was the
yeah.
connection? Yeah, maybe you could tell us
Sure.
about that.
So, and I talk about this in my book at length. So, in a real high level, my toxin exposures, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, drank from a private well. I'd say a vast majority of private wells in Iowa have been contaminated by atrazine. We were not an organic farm, so we were using atrazine, other herbicides. I helped my dad deworm the pigs, and you pour this deworming compound on the hogs and occasionally on cattle. So I'm exposed to all of that. I am an artist and have my undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting. So during my studio art degree, I did metallurgy with a lot of solder exposure. I was painting a variety of solvent exposures there as well. Then I had a dentist convince me to put in some fillings prophylactically. So we had 4 mercury fillings placed within a month's time. So it's sort of a big load there. Then I went to medical school and had a lot of formaldehyde exposure during my first year. And then during that summer, I decided to strip the paint off a condominium woodwork that I was living in. So I had 3 months of very intensive solvent exposure. There was not a lot of ventilation, so that was pretty big. And then you have the toxicity of how intense the medical school training is. Some of the teachers are a little more warm and fuzzy, and some are a little more intimidating. So I'd say that it was not the most nurturing environment to be in for 4 years in medical school, and then 4 years during residency as well. So sometimes it was very nurturing, and sometimes it was very toxic. And I'll tell you another very interesting tidbit. So 2 years into my recovery, I'm walking around very well. I'm biking with my family, feeling really good. And I thought, I'm curious about my toxic load because I figured toxins were part of my problem, and my protocol was designed to reduce toxins. So I did a 24-hour urine looking for a tox screen, and it came back diffusely positive. I think in the 20 heavy metals that were tested, there were only 4 that were not in the toxic range. And so that probably reflected less efficient metabolism of the toxins. Years as a vegetarian and being vitamin B12 deficient likely didn't help. And so I created some modifications to my protocol that I was using. I did some genetic testing myself to figure out which enzymes were not working so well. And then 2 years later, when I repeated my toxin screen, I had cleared everything out. So absolutely, I think toxins were part of why I became ill. And for many, many people with a autoimmune condition, they likely have enzymes that are less efficient at metabolizing and removing those toxins. So they're more likely to build up. And if you have someone do a careful functional medicine history, they can have some good ideas as to which toxins, enzymes are not working so well, and help you bypass that through some food choices and supplement choices.
Excellent. And so when you had taken this 2 years to really release this toxin burden, was that the release of those toxins? Did you start to see symptom relief during that time, or did it come much later, or was it really hand in hand with letting go of the toxins in your body?
Well, now keep in mind, I think the first 2 years of my recovery, I had made a whole slew of dietary changes that would really improve your detoxification. So I was probably detoxing then. Then when I realized how toxic I was, I made some further refinements and continued detoxing. I've had I'd say a pretty steady rate of improvement in terms of, my tolerance for standing, for walking, energy improvement. And I'd have to say, while I'm not quite normal yet, I still can't jog for a long time. And I can stand comfortably for an hour to give a lecture. It'd be pretty tough for me to do that for 2 hours. But every time I see my physical therapist, he measures me, I'm stronger, and advances my exercise program. So, and I had predicted that it would take 7 to 10 years to fully recover from the MS, if full recovery was possible. You have to really be in this for the long haul once the brain is affected.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. Now, Terry, you talk about the mitochondria. And
Yeah.
for our listeners, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more. How does the mitochondria play into conditions like autoimmune disease, especially multiple sclerosis? And is the mitochondria sensitive to toxicity?
So a quick refresher for people. 1.5 billion years ago, there was this terrible poison came to the planet Earth called oxygen, wiped out nearly all of life. and most of life was a single cellular thing at that time. There were a few bacteria that could take this poison and use it to generate energy more efficiently from the food they were digesting. These little bacteria were engulfed by bigger bacteria, and these little tiny bacteria are the forerunners of all of our mitochondria. And now all animals have cells that have mitochondria that run the energy for that cell. And all of our cells will have these mitochondria. The organs that use the most energy, like brain, retina, heart, have the most mitochondria per cell. And unfortunately, we aren't teaching physicians that you have to eat a very nutrient-dense diet to keep those mitochondria running well. And the toxins in the world, particularly heavy metals, arsenic, lead, mercury, are toxic to the enzymes involved in mitochondria. And furthermore, the antibiotics that we all take, or most people have taken sometimes in their life, are designed to harm bacteria. And what physicians forget is that our mitochondria are bacteria. Mm-hmm. And so these antibiotics are harmful for a bacteria. The longer you're on the antibiotic, the more damage you have to your mitochondria, and the greater the risk for brain fog, chronic exhaustion, chronic fatigue, multiple organ system dysfunction. And the more toxins we have, particularly the heavy metals, but the other pollutants can also damage those enzymes that are involved in the mitochondria and how they generate energy. You know, and clinically, Deanna, the mitochondria are our source of efficient energy. When the mitochondria are strained, people are going to be fatigued, they'll have brain fog, and they'll often have decreasing exercise endurance as the heart becomes less and less effective. So those are the three big clues that tell me mitochondria are not working well, and I have to help the person learn how to resuscitate and revive their ancient mitochondria.
So, of course, the listeners are going to want to know how to revive those ancient mitochondria. So, what are your general, if we think of the 19 key nutrients that you mentioned, and much of your plan is really focused around helping the mitochondria to be vital, that yes, this is our source of chi, so to speak. What is your protocol? How do we really focus on the mitochondria to get healthy? And in so doing, we let go of a lot of those toxins, and we can better equip the body to deal with any kind of insults.
So I have a food-based protocol that really stresses the B vitamins, organic sulfur, antioxidants, and minerals. So now to quick translate that into, okay, so what foods do I have to eat? Green leaves, sulfur-rich vegetables. Here I'm talking the cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family. And that's because sulfur is so important in the mitochondria and in removing toxins. And colors for those antioxidants, those should be things that are colored all the way through. So berries, beets would be colored, but an apple, red on the outside, white on the inside, is not in that colored category. I'm also very, very fond of getting more minerals into the diet. Life began in the ancient seas. Our blood reflects the mineral content of those ancient seas. And so I'm very fond of having people consume sea salt and seaweed to get more of those minerals. And of course, I go over this in much more detail with food lists and more specific guidance in my book.
Yeah, and B vitamins, that seems to be something, if you look at the Krebs cycle, you look at how the body gets energy, we definitely need those B vitamins. So that makes sense. And sulfur, we've been talking about that with various other presenters as part of the Detox Summit and how important sulfur is for the liver detox process. So it sounds like basically what you've described is also a detoxification, really optimizing how our body detoxes.
Yes. Now, let me put in a little more comment. So the three food groups that I emphasize in the sulfur category are cabbage family, onion family, and mushrooms. And now in the cabbage family, eating those foods will ramp up the enzymes that your liver and kidneys use to process and eliminate toxins. It also ramps up the enzymes in the brain, in all of our cells, to increase the production of glutathione, which is a very potent cellular antioxidant that helps protect the cells against free radical damage. Since we're chemical factories, in addition to the toxins that we eat and consume, I think your listeners should know that the very act of being alive and running the chemistry of life will generate free radicals and will generate some level of toxins that you need to ideally have your liver and kidney metabolize.
Right. And that's why you mentioned the antioxidants as being so important for that process
Yeah.
and getting colored foods, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, another thing that you mentioned that I think that everybody would have found very intriguing is this idea that you had some genetic tests to determine how well you metabolize. And you use that information to help you select foods to help your body do a better job. Can you talk a little bit more about those genetic tests? And, because there is kind of this notion out there that, well, the body detoxes on its own very well. That's why we have the liver and the kidneys and the gut and the skin and the lymph. And, we don't have to do detoxification protocols because our body is primed to do that. So what can you tell us about what you did to personalize your approach? Should we be personalizing nutrition?
So the protocol that I've created is a great first step, and for the vast majority of people, that's going to be sufficient. But for people who are not getting the results that were hoped for, the next thing they can do is personalize the intervention by getting functional medicine testing. And one of the tests you can do is a look at how efficient the enzymes are that are involved in processing and eliminating toxins. And so some of these genetic tests can tell you, do you have the wild type enzyme or a mutation? And if you have a mutation, the test is not going to tell you if it's a more efficient enzyme or a less efficient enzyme. It'll just tell you that you have a mutation. And it will probably give you some suggestions for vitamins, supplements, and foodstuffs that would help your cells bypass that step in the detoxification process. Now, what I think is really very interesting is as I have gone through this testing, I saw that for many of these bypasses, the suggestion is eat more cabbage, eat more color, and get more iodine in place. So that's an important part of the protocol. In addition, they may suggest some specific amino acid supplements or a higher dose of particular vitamins to get you past that step. It can be very, very helpful for the person who does not respond sufficiently well to the standard protocol, but certainly not required by the majority. It would be a small minority that will need it, but it can be very helpful for them.
Yes, exactly. And as you mentioned, that's a functional medicine-based test. So I'm kind of curious. So you've personalized your approach. You're doing a lot better. So based on the protocol you described, I didn't hear any supplements. I heard that, this is a food-based approach.
Yeah.
There are, however, many detox regimens available that do use supplements.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, so what is your take? Do people need to take supplements in order to effectively detox? Should they be doing this detoxification quarterly, one time a year, twice a year, or should they be doing it all the time with food? What's your personal preference?
In my clinical practice, my clinical trials, we do food all the time. And in my clinical practice, I will tailor the vitamin and supplement recommendation based on the history and the results of some pretty straightforward tests that your primary care doc can do. And I talk about that in the book, actually. In my clinical trial, because of the nature of clinical trials, you have to have everybody get the same thing. We use some B vitamins for the clinical trial. And certainly supplements can be helpful. My caution to the listeners are that you want to have somebody helping you with the supplements because the nutrition that nourishes our cells depends on ratios of amino acids, ratio of essential fats, ratio of vitamins, ratio of minerals. And as soon as we begin taking them in supplement form, we run the risk of getting the ratios outside of the optimal health range. So supplements can be extremely helpful. They're sometimes necessary. Best to have them targeted based on history in lab monitoring. As soon as you take supplements, there's some hazard of getting the ratios outside the optimal health range and either not having the benefit or having side effects.
So, Terry, why do you think, there have been a lot of studies on supplements, whether it's multivitamins, vitamin E, and some of it is not very positive. And I think that many people are very fearful about taking supplements. And so I think that a lot of the guidance that you just provided about getting tested and working with somebody, I think that those are really good rules of thumb.
A comment about those studies.
Yeah.
So what those studies tell me is if you don't change your diet and you just take supplements, you've wasted your money. The magic is in the food, getting more of the right stuff, taking the harmful things away. And for some people, targeted supplements based on history and testing will add terrific benefit. But if you're just going to keep eating this toxic standard American diet and take vitamins, you probably didn't do much.
Yeah, people might see it as a Band-Aid or just, then they can go out and eat nutrient poor foods because they took their supplement.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, what about one thing that you have not mentioned yet, but I'm going to go back to the mitochondria because there's a lot of great literature on the mitochondria and fasting or giving the mitochondria a break so it doesn't produce all of these aging compounds, these free radicals. What's your take on fasting? Is that healthy for a detoxification? Is it healthy in general? And how, if it is, what are the parameters that you would place around fasting?
This is a wonderful question. I talk about it a lot in my book. And when you fast, you increase the number of mitochondria, you increase the efficiency. It's how you and I survived war, famine, starvation, all those things. In fact, our brain cells and bodies do very well fasting. And it has a nice anti-aging effect. You can get some of that, but you can do that by going on a fast, eating 30% less calories than what your metabolism requires. You could do that by fasting for 24 hours every other day and not eating extra than more than what your metabolism needs on the days you get to eat. Or you can fast for 12 to 16 hours every day. My preference is do the 12 to 16-hour fast every day. I find that to be just much more comfortable.
But what I hear from researchers and even practitioners is that the liver needs nutrients in order to best detoxify. So how do we reconcile those two aspects, needing things like protein and certain nutrients versus using fasting? And I'm just curious, too, if you can talk about this. Is fasting good for everybody, or do we have to think about certain people that might have diabetes or other conditions that warrants more eating?
Fasting's not good for pregnant, not good for children. So those two groups you would not want to fast. Everyone else would be unlikely to be harmed. Now, one, of course, has to realize that there may be specific medical conditions where fasting's not going to be appropriate.
Good. So, and I like the fact that you gave us a number of different ways that fasting can be brought in. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Just looking at lifestyle even. So I know that you cover food as medicine very thoroughly in your books. Are there other aspects that we need to be thinking about in our lifestyle when it comes to toxins, different types of toxins? How do we avoid them? And, how have you even changed your life? Living in Iowa, you're surrounded by agriculture, by farms with, farms that are sprayed. So how do we live our lives in a more clean way?
Well, you certainly want to be mindful of your food, be organic or as organic as your budget will allow you. And then think very carefully about everything you put on your skin. A lot of the personal care products have been marketed, convincing us that we smell bad, taste bad, whatever. And most of those personal care products have a lot of toxic heavy metals, plastic solvents, things that will confuse our biology. So decrease the use of personal care products that have compounds in whose name you cannot pronounce. That's a good reason to think that it is a compound that's going to confuse your biology. If you take a shower every day, wash your armpits, I don't think you're going to need, and you have a clean diet, quit putting on deodorant and antiperspirants, which have a lot of heavy metals in them. Think about your indoor environment. A lot of the paints, floor covering, furniture is made with compounds that will release toxic fumes. So the more you get into this, the more you can think about your choices in your living space and the air that you're going to breathe, the things that you're going to put on your skin to minimize the synthetic compounds. That will be extremely helpful.
Yeah. So, toxicity is really all around us. Do you think that for some of the patients that you work with, do you think that people have an initial response of fear and almost, oh my goodness, I can't control these things. I can't move out of my house, or, I can't really do certain things about toxins in my life. So what do we do in those cases?
We just start one step at a time.
Mhm.
I help them ease into the Wahls diet. And then as they get that more successful, then we can begin a conversation about the other toxins in their environment. And I talk about personal care products and their use of other chemicals in their home. And we also talk about workplace exposures and what exposures do they have solvent-wise, chemicals at work.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some of those hidden toxins we may not always be aware of. So Terry, I just have a question for you. Back to food, briefly.
Yeah.
A lot of the presenters are talking about kind of if they were to create an ideal meal or a smoothie for enhancing detoxification in the body, this is what it would be. And I'm kind of curious if you were on a desert island and you had to take with you the perfect meal to keep you alive and your mitochondria healthy, your liver working well, your gut working well, you had to stay clean of toxins. What might you have as that perfect meal?
What I'll do, maybe more practical, is so when I travel, what do I take with me to make sure I can be okay away from my
Perfect.
house for a week?
Yes.
We'll take algae, powdered algae that I'll mix and I'll drink every morning. So I'm going to get plenty of greens and sulfur that way. I'll probably take a small head of red cabbage because that will get me my cabbage. It's also going to be brightly colored. I'm probably going to be able to get berries while I'm away. So that's going to be okay. I can probably get some meat while I'm away. That's okay. But it's going to be hard to get my organ meat. So I'll make dehydrated liver, so liver jerky. And I will have that because liver, particularly when it's organic, is really a superfood. It is tremendous source of your vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. But has to be organic. Must be organic.
Gosh, it's so interesting that you came from more or less a vegetarian path for 20 years and now have transitioned into doing much more in the way of meat. And I know
Yeah.
for many listeners, they may not eat meat, that may not be part of their daily living. Do you feel like that's an essential for people that are very concerned about immune issues?
I had many requests for a vegetarian version of my protocol. So we did, in fact, create that. In my book, I talk about what I see as the nutritional risks and the health risks of vegetarian diet, why animal protein may be very helpful. But I also recognize that for some people, based on their religious and spiritual beliefs, that animal protein is not going to be acceptable to them. And so I give them the strategies to reduce their risk and maximize their health outcomes. And I also am quite frank in saying that I think the best health outcomes would require animal protein. However, I also acknowledge that if you have a very nutrient dense diet that's vegetarian and vegan, and you follow the strategies I've recommended for reducing the potential downside risk of the vegetarian vegan diet, I think people can do quite well. And I acknowledge that there certainly have been wonderful healing stories with the vegetarian vegan diet. And there are people who have terrific health with those diets. And so if someone is at ideal body mass and is enjoying terrific health, then they are apparently doing the vegetarian vegan diet very successfully. But if they have a chronic complex medical problem as a vegetarian and vegan, that to me tells me that their nutrition is likely part of the problem and needs to be adjusted in some way.
Okay, good guidance there. And even on the liver, what I've heard from various people, even within functional medicine, is since the liver does a lot of the detoxifying, that they would not advocate that their patients eat liver. But you're saying because it has all these cofactors, it's a very nutritious part of the animal that can give us a lot of those nutrients that we need for detox.
It's actually critical nutrition. And if you look in the wild, our carnivores will eat organ meats and leave the muscle meat behind. If you look at traditional hunter-gatherer societies, a large proportion, a third, quite routinely, of the animal protein is organ meat. Mm-hmm. If you look at modern society, for thousands of generations, organ meats were a vital part of the nutrition. I have this wonderful book, The Compendium of Modern Cookery from 1890, mm-hmm. that my great-grandmother had. Wonderful chapter in there about organ meats and the critical role organ meats play in health. And then somehow we got confused. Just because the liver is where you detoxify compounds doesn't make the liver toxic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I take great exception to my functional medicine folks who say that organ meat should not be consumed. It absolutely should be consumed, but you have to be very careful that it's nutritionally clean, that it's organic, and free of hormones as possible.
And Terry, how's the taste? Have you made it palatable? When you say that you dehydrate it, does it taste good then?
You marinate it, you put it in with a lot of spices. I like things hot and spicy, so I think it's quite delicious. Learning how to make liver and onions, you have to be careful not to overcook it. If you overcook it, it's awful, but if you leave it medium rare, it's really quite wonderful. Mm-hmm. If you make liver pate, wonderful. My teenage kids actually like that. Heart, also excellent source, is my kids and my family say this is like the best steak they've ever had. And it used to be that brains was a terrific delicacy. And certainly there's great anthropologic evidence that the reasons humans were able to grow big brains is that when we were in Africa, we were bashing in the skulls and eating brains that the lions, et cetera, could not eat.
Oh, interesting. So it really brings in the medical anthropology side too.
Yes. So the organ meats can be quite delicious. And I'd remind everyone that we all acquire a taste for our culture. And taste is very much a culturally acquired taste. That for most of us, we have to be exposed to a new taste 5 to 30 times before we really enjoy it and crave it. Just because something does not taste as pleasing as you expected the first time does not mean that if you continue eating it, you won't develop a great appreciation for those more complex flavors.
It's true. And it's back to the concept of food being medicine. Food is information. And so if we see it in that way, perhaps we can bring down our taste benchmark a bit more and, learn to appreciate food for the medicinal qualities it imparts to us.
Absolutely.
So, Terry, we're at the close of our interview. I'm wondering a couple of things. So, first of all, I'm wondering if you could summarize 3 main takeaways for the listener based on everything that you said. If you wanted them just to remember 3 things that are so important for them with respect to toxicity and keeping their bodies clean, what would those be?
Eat more non-starchy vegetables. Mm-hmm. Eat organ meat. Eat seaweed.
Great. I love it. And very memorable. I really like those. We'll post those on our social media too. So perfect. How can people find you? Obviously you've written your book. Just give us the soundbite here on your websites and everything going on for you.
So go to Terry Wahls, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. Please put in your email so you can get the free materials we talk about in the book. Of course, we'd like you to pre-order the Wahls protocol so you can get that life-changing information as soon as possible.
Yes, I would highly recommend it. Really a fabulous. Everything that Terry has talked about is so incredibly valuable. And so the question is, how can you put that into motion? So I think that getting her book and really working with your practitioner is a great first step. So thank you, Dr. Wahls, so much for being part of the Detox Summit. It's really been a pleasure to have you and to hear your story and to bask in your wisdom, which is immense. So thank you so much.
And thank you.